Hi, my name is Charles Borges de Oliveira, and this video is on tips and troubleshooting. We will show you how to get the most out of using the Rough-It actions, as well as covering basic troubleshooting. So let's begin. Okay, for this tip, what I like to do is I like to copy the word that I'm going to run the Rough-It action on, and I'll copy it 2 or 3 times. And then that way, after I run the action, I can go back and choose which letters I like. So I've got the word script here, and I'm going to go ahead and select it. And the height is 0.85 of an inch. And so I'm going to change my keyboard increments, and you can set it to 1 inch or whatever your preference is. In this case, I'm going to do 0.85. And I'm going to go ahead and copy it and paste it in front. And I'll just move it up 1. And again, I'll do the same thing. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and run my action. So I'm going to go ahead and select all my text here. And I'm using Rough-It 2. I'm going to use Rough-It. So I'm going to go ahead and press play. And we'll let Rough-It do its thing. Okay, it's just about finished here. Okay, so now I can go in here and choose which letters I like the best. I like this S, so I'm going to keep that. I like the C here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and ungroup everything. I'm going to delete the C, and I'll grab this one, and I'm just going to move it up. And since we did the keyboard increments, everything is kept in place, so you don't have to worry about trying to move everything around. Okay, so the next one, I like this R. I like this. I think I like this version of the I better, so I'm going to go ahead and just select that. I'll delete that, and I'll go ahead and move this up. And I like this P here, so maybe I'll take this one out, and I'll just move this down. And I like this T the best, so let's go ahead and delete this one. And I'll just go ahead and select this and move it up 1 increment. And now I can go ahead and just delete the text that I'm not using. And there we go. Now I've got pretty much the look I was going for. And we'll move on to the next tip. Okay, scale is very important in Rough-It. The way it works is the smaller your text or object, the greater the effect will be. And the larger your text or object, the smaller and tighter the effect will be. And I'll go ahead and demonstrate that. I've got 1/2 inch text, 3/4 inch text, 1 inch, and 1 1/4. So let's go ahead and run an action on this, and we can see exactly what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to go ahead and press play. Okay, so let's go ahead and zoom in here. And you can see the 1/2 inch text. It's got a lot of the effect. Everything's a lot bigger effects-wise, the gaps. And as we move over here to the 3/4 inch text, you see it's starting to get a little bit tighter. And then if we move into the 1 inch text, we can see it getting a lot tighter. And as well as with the 1 1/4. So just to recap here, scale is very important. The smaller the text or object, the greater the effect. The larger the text or object, the tighter and smaller the effect. Okay, for this tip, we're going to explain that you don't always have to run the Rough-It actions on a horizontal plane. You can rotate your text or object vertically and achieve a different look. So I'm going to go ahead and select my text here. And we'll be running 2 actions, one on a horizontal plane and one with a vertical plane. So I've got Rough-It 2 selected, and I'm going to run the very first action here, Rough-It. So I'll go ahead and press play, and we'll let Rough-It run through its actions here. Okay, so we've got the first action run. I'm going to go ahead and select the text, and I'm going to go ahead and rotate it, and I'm holding the Shift key down. And now I'm going to go up to the original Rough-It folder, and I'll be running the first action here, Rough-It. So I'll go ahead and press play. And we'll just run through its course here. And there we go. So now we've got not only horizontal edge treatment, but we also have vertical edge treatment. Okay, in this video, we'll cover basic troubleshooting as well as what to do when the feather dialog box pops up. Also, this video is made to remind the user that all Ruffit 2 actions should be run on a separate file and not in the working file, as it'll flatten all the layers. Okay, so I've got two R's here. The first one is editable text, and the other one here is text that's been converted to outlines. And the reason why I have both these samples here is I want to show what happens when you try to run an action on a piece of clip art or any object that's in outlines. So I'm going to go ahead and select the first one here. And for this demonstration we'll be using Ruffit 2, and I'm using the Ruffit 9 action. So I'm going to go ahead and press play. And here comes the dialog box I was talking about. The object create outlines is not currently available. This does not affect the actions at all. It's just saying that it can't convert this to outlines because it's already in outlines. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete this one. Okay, so now this one, the editable text R here, I'm going to go ahead and run the same action. You'll notice that the dialog box does not come up because it's going to actually create it into outlines. So I'll go ahead and press play. Okay, two things here. You'll notice over here in the layers palette, it's creating a layer off of the original object here. Again, this is, I want to stress that using Ruffit 2 actions, create a new file, because if you had your artwork here, when the action's finishing up, it's going to flatten everything, and it'll ask you if you want to discard hidden artwork. If you say yes, you're going to lose whatever background you have, and if you say no, it's going to flatten everything together into one object. Okay, so the next thing here is the dialog box that pops up, and it says the object ungroup is not currently available. The reason why this is popping up is we only have one object here. If we had multiple objects, you would not get this dialog box. And again, just click continue. It won't affect the outcome of the action. So I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. Okay, so now it's saying make sure the value for feather is set to 0.01 if you're using inches and 0.72 if you're using points. Some of the actions use the feather effect, and in my case I'm using inches, so I'm going to plug in the value of 0.01. So I'll hit continue. And my dialog box already has it set to 0.01. Your default might be 0.015, might even be 0.1. If you're working in points, it's 0.72 is the setting you want to use. Since I'm in inches, I'm going to put 0.01. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Okay, so next it's saying change the image trace to Ruffit 3. And this gives me a good point to bring up here. The neat thing about the Ruffit actions is you don't have to use the recommended preset. I'll demonstrate that here. The action is originally calling for Ruffit 3. Okay, so that's what this is. But I can always switch it to Ruffit 2 if I want. I could do Cleanup 2. It's just whatever effect you're really trying to go for. It's just a nice advantage of being able to use different presets. But in this case, I'm going to stick to the original that it calls for, which is Ruffit 3. And I'm going to go ahead and press play. And there we go. You'll notice over here that all the layers that were created are now flattened. And we have our finished vectorized object here. Okay, in this troubleshooting video, we're going to be covering what happens when you run an action and it doesn't work. There's three factors to consider. Make sure you are in a true CMYK file. If you started the file as RGB and try to switch to CMYK, it won't work. You have to create a new file and make sure it's CMYK. The other problem that people have is they don't load the swatches or graphic styles correctly. That's the major factor for the actions not working, and I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that here. Okay, so I've got the swatches palette open here, and I'm going to go ahead and load the Rough It swatches. I'm also going to do the same with the graphic styles. Okay, so now that I've opened the swatches and graphic styles, they're not loaded in the appropriate place they're supposed to be. The graphic styles need to be in the graphic styles palette, and the swatches need to be in the swatches palette. But I'm going to go ahead and run the action without loading the swatches or graphic styles. So I'm going to go ahead and select the text here, and I'm going to go ahead and run just the Rough It, the very first action here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and hit trace, and I'll hit play. And this brings up a good point. Notice it says the object clear is not currently available. The reason being is it's looking for compound shapes that are have no color or stroke associated with it. If Rough It doesn't find it, we'll get this dialog box. Just hit continue. It does not affect the outcome of the action. Okay, so nothing happened. So now let's load the swatches and graphic styles, and we'll run the action again. Okay, so I've got the text here that I originally started with, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. And before I do that, I'm going to load the swatches and graphic styles. So holding the control key down on a Mac would be command. I'm going to select the very first one, and I'm going to hold the shift key and select the very last. And that highlights all of our swatches here. And now I'm going to go to this drop down menu, and I'm going to say add to swatches. And you'll notice that it transferred these into the swatches panel. This is the correct way to do it. The actions will not run properly if there's no swatches here. Okay, so now let's move on to graphic styles. And again, I'm going to do the same over here. I'm going to select the very first one, holding shift key down, select the last, and say add to graphic styles. Okay, so now we can run our action. Let's go ahead and do it. Okay, so now we just hit trace and we press play. And that time it cleared up any compound shapes. Illustrator CC and CS6, they both work a little different in that aspect. So to keep it compatible, I have to put the clear command in the actions. Again, if that pops up, it's nothing to worry about. Just hit continue. It's not really an error, just the action did not find anything to clear. Okay, so now the action ran, and you'll see that it worked perfectly because the graphic styles and swatches were loaded. As well, it was a CMYK file. Well, that concludes this video on tips and troubleshooting. Thanks for watching.